Good morning out there, traders. It is December 29th, 2023. Welcome to the Apteros Daily Market Insight. Let's dive into our recap and then we will update our levels for today. So, taking a look at what was going on yesterday, we had a couple of different scenarios, but basically we were dealing with this upper line in the sand, and that was kind of our critical area for the session. Scenario one being that we hold above that, scenario two that we get down below it. Of course, we had some other scenarios depending on how things played out, but turns out all we needed yesterday was scenario one. Essentially, we were looking at this line in the sand to possibly head up into this target area here at 48.44, something like that. We got a lot of really good inflections during our session here off of our line in the sand. Just none of them really kind of moving up into that target area. So it was really just kind of a very rotational day without a lot of excess. That's an important idea or concept of what happened yesterday. Essentially, we just stacked up against these upper zones here around the 48.40s, and we're never able to really quite break out through that and kind of created a poor high on the session yesterday without any real clear indication that the auction to the upside was capitulatory. So at this point here, we now have a pretty defined range in this particular section here, and that's really what we saw yesterday overall in the market. Our planning and prep on our line in the sand was spot on. We just didn't get the follow through, and that happens sometimes. So now let's update our levels for today, and let's get into it. Okay, so now taking a look at what's going on here today, we have an interesting landscape. The overall context, what we're looking at, is still generally bullish on the higher time frames, and that's really still where everything is kind of situated. However, we do have some more recent market generated information around this upper line in the sand here that is creating some dissonance for us. In other words, if we cannot get above this particular bearish area, then maybe a deeper pullback could be possibly in the morning, heading down to that neutral zone if we clear out this particular neutral reference. So kind of an interesting landscape overall to what's going on in the context. We have basically two concepts that we're going to be looking at in our scenarios today. If this bearish level holds, we'll be looking to get below this neutral reference here. And if that neutral reference clears out, then it's kind of a nice short coming down into this neutral area here. From there, if we get a continuation to the downside, it would be more options coming into that lower line in the sand. However, if this bearish area fails and we actually get a push up above it, that's going to be good information for us for continuation to the upside for today's session. And we'll be looking for this 48.44s, and then there's actually a target up above here a little bit further up around 48.75s and 48.80s. And that would be kind of the stretch target overall in the session if we got a pretty bullish session coming out of today. Now, what's interesting about what's going on in the overall picture for the DMI is that we're kind of in a clearly defined range from yesterday, very rotational overall here. So we're going to be paying attention to how we behave around this rotational context. So now let's dive into our scenarios, right? So our line in the sand here, this early bearish line in the sand, remember that this is not the overall picture of the ES, right? This is more or less the immediate information that we're getting based on yesterday's trading session and some of our time frames kind of doing some shifting around. So this particular line in the sand is really important to the auction, especially early on. If we can clear it out, we're going to see more to the upside. If we hold below it, we're probably going to see maybe a deeper pullback, especially if we get back underneath this 48.28s. So that's kind of the overall idea around that line in the sand. So at this upper line in the sand, we're looking at scenario one, which is what we're currently kind of seeing, that this pulls back up, maybe possibly, and essentially holds, and we're looking to stay bearish below this particular zone. If it just continues down from here, we get a breakdown below this neutral reference here, that would be a possible continuation heading down into that lower neutral zone there. And that would kind of be what we're looking for out of scenario one, getting down into this area. And if it continued from there, obviously we can get the pull all the way down into that lower line in the sand. But the overall idea for scenario one is really just kind of traversing into this section here. From there, we can look at scenario two, which would be the break up, right? So we start breaking out to the upside, maybe get a pullback here heading into that 48.44s. And if we continue above that, we have that upper stretch target, like I said, up there around 48.75s. For that. This would kind of be a lot of open space if we get scenario two playing out to the upside, especially if it gets above that 48.44 section, right? So that's the game plan around this upper line in the sand. Remember that our current what is picture is still to the downside on this thing. So that's scenario 1 off of this line in the sand. But we'll be monitoring that, especially using our shorter term tools to look for any type of bullishness and any type of break of this particular line in the sand. Now, coming down below here, if we do end up seeing scenario 1 hold and we get a continuation or a push all the way down to the bottom, we have some interesting scenarios that could play out here. In other words, if we get down into this target zone here, we can actually end up seeing the ES kind of stabilize and then push back up. And this would be a perfectly acceptable scalp in this type of environment. It would make sense of what we're seeing overall in this market. The reason why it's neutral right now is because we haven't seen a hold in that location yet. So it's neutral right now because it's a likely destination for a bearish move. Once we get here, if we start seeing this neutral reference hold, it would become a lot more bullish in the overall environment that we're seeing. So taking a look at this area down here, this neutral reference, you can kind of consider this right now as a target. But once we get there, if it does hold, you're going to be looking at that being a little bit more bullish with a pullback up into that 48.28s and a possible continuation back up into that line in the sand zone. Okay, so that's what we're doing around that neutral reference there. And then our lower line in the sand, this is really the overall bullishness we've been seeing for the last 2 months, 3 months or so. So this is kind of what we've been following along with in the what is picture overall in the context of the ES. And scenario 3 is just holding up above that, and getting down below that would be scenario 4. And is it likely to go down into scenario 4? Probably not, but we are planning for it just in case something crazy happens. So scenario 4, if we get down below, we have that 47.67 type of area down there to look for. And that's kind of the overall entire landscape of what's going on today in the ES. Now, our immediate picture, like I said, is this real line in the sand here. Scenario 2 and 1 are going to be really important to us. If we get up above and hold above, that's more upside likely. If we hold below in scenario 1, in other words, we just kind of inflect coming back down, we're looking to clear out this neutral reference and head down into this one. And then, of course, down here at this neutral reference, we'll be monitoring for any kind of stabilization and a push back up, making this a little bit more of a bullish and kind of an alternate scenario with a possible, scalp level type of opportunity here, looking for us coming back up into this zone here. Like I said, the only reason why it's not bullish right now is because currently it would be a destination to the downside of what we're currently seeing in the what is picture here, that line in the sand. And then, of course, continuations and so forth head us back into our main line in the sand in the overall context for being bullish here in the landscape of the ES. So a little bit more of a complicated DMI today, especially because of what's going on around this neutral reference here, because using our NADRO tools, we understand kind of the overall landscape of what we're looking for whenever it comes to targets, the risk-reward landscape, and the expectations around different trade ideas. So it's kind of one of those things that some areas like this can be neutral kind of at the beginning of the day, and then they could evolve into being something more bullish or bearish depending on the evolving context and the narrative that's happening around that area. So if you want to know more, obviously you can look us up and explore our materials further. And of course, we have courses and things like that that help teach the full framework and methodology. So trade well out there, and please, mind your risk and follow your process and have a great trading day.